Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 25 of my 2021 reads. This week I read quite a few great queer books, and I participated in another collaborative video, so I'll talk about that at the end of this video. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. The first book that I finished this week was The Art of Drag, written by Jake Hall, illustrated by Sofie Birkin, Helen Lee, and Jasjyot Singh Hans. This is a nonfiction graphic work that I heard about originally from Kazen at Always Doing. I will link her channel below. She always reads the coolest nonfiction. And this is really the history and the art form of drag. So it's going through different forms of performance art, wearing the clothing of other genders, but also just wearing clothing that is meant to break the rules, in a sense, of the way that we're kind of dressing in normal life, playing with gender, playing with costuming. And the illustrations in this are so cool. So there are 3 illustrators, and each of them takes on a different section of time, a different chapter in the book, and they have really, really beautiful illustrations. I'm going to show some of these illustrations as I talk. I've seen Jen at Remembered Reads, who I will link below, do that, and I really like how that gives you a feel for what the book looks like. A lot of these art styles are very, very stylized, but I think they're really fantastic, and the colors are so vibrant and so just beautiful. I really liked the way that this book took a look at sort of the history of drag as an art form, and really focused on that art form, really focused on what was being said, what the social movements were, what it was being used to express, and a lot of the different ways that drag has been used by different communities, and the way that, you know, it is often a sense of play. There's so much fun in this book, and it was really thoroughly engaging and uplifting and beautiful. I had such a fun time with this. I think that if you like history and you like art, this is an excellent book to pick up. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Funny Boy by Shyam Selvadurai. This is a historical fiction set in the 1980s in Sri Lanka, and it follows a boy, sort of a coming-of-age story, as he deals with his own kind of burgeoning sexuality as he realizes that he's gay, as well as the Tamil Sinhalese conflict that was happening in Sri Lanka. So the Tamils were a kind of ethnic minority, but fighting for more rights and independence, often with violence, in Sri Lanka. And we follow a boy who is Tamil, and there's so much in this that is really looking at that history of the conflict and the sort of social ways that that affects things. The idea of who you can be friends with and who you can marry, and how people treat each other, and what your options are in terms of how far you go in work, and all of these sorts of things. So this book is pretty evenly split between the idea of this young boy who is figuring out that he's gay, as well as dealing with all of this Tamil Sinhalese conflict. I think that this story is so great if you're interested in historical fiction, because I thought that the historical aspect of this was so cool. Just learning about a lot of the issues that were happening of this sort of ethnic divide in Sri Lanka, and the way that that affected people. The story of the boy himself, I was somehow not as engaged in as I'd hoped to be. I thought that at times things were maybe a little bit overly dramatic for my taste, and also sometimes the experiences that the boy went through as he was growing up seemed more like artificially constructed experiences to emphasize the historical aspects, so kind of exploring different facets of the Tamil Sinhalese conflict, rather than, you know, kind of naturally flowing through the story. So I think that this was really cool. I especially loved in the end just how it explored a lot of the riots and things that happened in Sri Lanka. So for the historical aspect, this was excellent, even though I had some of those issues. So I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read We Are Satellites by Sarah Pinsker. This is a new release near future science fiction, and I read this with Kristen at Kristenelle SFF Reader, who I will link below, and a group of friends on Goodreads. This is such a cool story. But I don't think that it's necessarily going to work for everybody. It worked for me though. So this is a near future where there's a new technology developed, which is sort of like a neuro implant that helps you multitask. So it makes you kind of able to handle more input processing, basically. And this starts to become so prevalent where everybody is getting it that anybody not with it is sort of almost considered disabled, and is very much discriminated against. And we follow a family, two moms and their older son and younger daughter. And when we start the story, the son is in high school and the daughter is in elementary school. And the daughter also has seizures, which means that she's never going to be eligible for getting this neural implant because she has like a health condition. And so this is the story of this family's decisions about whether or not each member of the family should get one of these implants, what that means, if it's important for staying current with your job and with your future, what the consequences are of getting it. And it's just this really good exploration of a lot of these decisions. I think that the parts that I loved so much about this book were the way that this explored not just the kind of implications of a technology that is so pervasive that it's hard to reject, but also the implications for all kinds of people. So the younger daughter who cannot get one. Also, the older son does get one, but his doesn't work quite as expected. And how does, that play out? There's a lot in this about disability, a lot in this about the way that people are treated and the way that others perceive them, a lot about how, sometimes medical professionals don't listen, and how a lot of things work differently for different bodies. So there's so much in this about disability that I thought was really fascinating. The other thing that I thought was so cool about this story was the family dynamic. Now this was really, really cool. The parents are kind of slightly different from each other in the way that they approach things, but both of them really want to protect their kids while also recognizing that they should be kind of hands-off. They should give their children independence, and the way that they navigate that and the way that they mess up, and the way that they deal with some of the consequences of their poor choices is really fascinating. So I wouldn't call this, I don't know, this didn't feel to me like family drama, but it felt like family conflict. And I really liked the way that that was explored. Now, the only thing that I think didn't 100% work for me, and for other people will probably be a big issue, is the pacing. I found this a little bit slow. And if I find this a little bit slow, given that I love slow books, I think for many other people, this is going to read incredibly slowly. The plot is there, but it is very, very, very slowly paced. And a lot of what this book is doing is just exploring these characters, exploring their dynamic, and exploring the consequences of this technology. And it's not necessarily having this huger overarching plot. There's not a lot of action. And so I think that for a lot of people, this will read slow, but I loved it so much. So I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Genderqueer by Maia Kobabe, colored by Phoebe Kobabe. This is a queer coming-of-age graphic memoir all about Kobabe growing up and exploring gender and sexuality. Kobabe is genderqueer, and this is really just that exploration of what gender means, and a lot of issues of navigating gender and sort of the society around you. There's a lot in here about body dysmorphia, and a lot about just not even having the words to talk about gender or sexuality sometimes until you see other people modeling it. So there's a lot in here that I thought was really, really, really cool. The art style is okay. It's not so much my style. And there is quite a bit of very graphic bodily things in this that were a little bit much for me, but I do think that this is a really neat story in terms of understanding what that process is like of somebody coming to terms with their gender. So I think this was a really cool memoir, and I see why everybody recommends it so highly. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read Willowes by Sylvia Townsend Warner, who was a queer author writing in the first half of the 20th century. I picked this up because Anna Marie at Actual Spinster is running Summer with Sylvia. I'm going to link their announcement video for that below, but basically they're going to be reading a bunch of different books by Sylvia Townsend Warner over the summer. So I decided to jump on and read Willowes, which is Sylvia Townsend Warner's perhaps most famous book. Even though that wasn't technically the book for June, I decided to start with that one. And I can see why this was kind of a famous book. It is really a beautifully written, I guess you could say coming of age story, but it's more of a coming into middle and elder age story. So this is about Laura Willowes, who later gets dubbed Aunt Lolly, therefore Lolly Willowes. And she's somebody who is very much an introvert, grows up, and just has no interest in marriage or anything like that. And so she ends up just sort of staying with her family. She lives with her father until her father passes away, and then lives with her older brother and his wife, and just kind of stays with their family and like helps them take care of their house and their children. And only in middle age, once the, her nieces and nephews are grown, does she kind of realize that she's not actually happy just being this person who is a dependent on her relatives. And she actually has independent income. It's just that in that part of the early 20th century, it wasn't really common for women to go live by themselves. And she decides, you know what, I'm gonna go live by myself. And she makes her way out to a rural area and starts living there. And so this is all about her sort of pursuing what she really wants in life, which is solitude and connection to nature. There's some beautiful nature writing in this, especially in the second part of the book. There's so much about her just being connected to nature. And there's a lot in this that is social commentary on the way that women are forced into these roles, into these positions in society, such as the anti-lolly position for her, which aren't really fulfilling to them. So it's a very feminist work, and it is just really, really beautifully written. The third part of this book goes into a little bit of the supernatural, and that part didn't work as well for me, but I really thoroughly enjoyed, especially the first 2 parts of the book. And there's so much here that's social commentary with a little bit of that sort of biting, dry humor that I think I associate with people like Jane Austen, that I really, really liked. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, so that's everything that I read this week. I also did want to mention a video that I was in that was like a collaborative video on the Worldhoppers channel. We did the mid-year freakout tag sci-fi edition, so I will link that below. A couple of us got together and just sort of answered all of the questions of the mid-year book freakout tag, which is the hardest title ever, but specifically about sci-fi books. And so that was actually a lot of fun. I'm not planning to do any sort of mid-year content specifically on my channel, like the tag or like a stats video or anything like that. So if you want to kind of hear that content from me, go ahead and check out that video. I think also just is fun to hear from other people as well and what their thoughts were on their favorite books and disappointments and all that sort of stuff. And I had such a fun time with the conversation. And it was very fun to do it sci-fi specific. So I really enjoyed that. And again, it's linked below. So if you guys have read any of the books that I read this week, or if you have any thoughts or any recommendations, anything at all, just leave me a comment down below.